So for this video, we're going to be going through the import stage of Register 360. So before I go import, just to go through my settings real quick, here's what I got. Copy them if you want. This is what I'm just going to be using for the sake of this demonstration. I think some of these are still default values as well, with the link creation criteria, values, overlap, percentages, all that. So that's everything that I got. Okay. So with importing, typically after you open, it's going to show right up into this kind of file open, but you can always just top left corner, file open, create a new job. So I've already got this example data set imported, which we'll hop into after the fact, but I'll still show you all the steps and examples leading up to that final before we hit import. So import training. So with this right out the gate, a couple different panels to look at and understand what's all going on. So on this left-hand side is going to be where you're ultimately going to drag and drop your raw scans. You can also search through your browse files, go find the folder that has the raw scans, or if you're doing or using any of these other scanners that can connect directly either through the hardware or through the iPad Field 360 app, you can also directly import the projects through those. Sometimes I think that's also the only way to import jobs or scans, but for now I'm just using RTC 360 data, so all I'm going to be doing is dragging and dropping. So we'll go ahead and get that imported. And as always, it's going to freeze up for a second until it ultimately loads in the scans. So once it loads them in, you see them populate, then you can actually drag and move all of these setups around. So in 2025.0.0, typically you can right click, pan around like anything else, but at the moment it's bugged. So you can't, all you can do is just zoom in and out based off the center point. But you're going to see all of your scans loading in. In this case, we used the iPad Field 360 to create all these links. Kept it really simple in the field. Didn't add a whole lot of cross links, just closed some loops. Just because my current workflow, I kind of tend to keep the field side basic and not add all the possible cross links, because I'll just let the software do that after it's imported, to where I know for certain all the links that it creates are good, and I got all the data to actually work with. So now they're fully loaded in. You don't have to wait for them to fully load, but if you want to go and add additional cross links between setups or close the loops or whatever you want, you can do that right on this import stage before it fully imports. So you'll select one setup, control, select the other, add link. So you just gotta be careful. You don't want to like add a bad link, right? That's like all the way across. There's zero overlap. That link's never gonna work. So you're not gonna know until it's fully imported. So this one I don't want. So you can just select the link you don't want and you can delete it and go from there. So you can continue to do that. But within this left-hand side panel, you're going to have your setups tab, your attachments or geotags, and then any kind of control that's been brought in along with this raw scan. I'm not using the control import, so I'm not going to go over that. But if you have any images, geotags, stuff, you'll see them populate here as well. But inside this setup folder, if you pull this out a little bit further, so right now, everything's one bundle. All setups are tied together in a singular bundle. Say I didn't want to import them all in one shot. I only wanted to import a chunk of them. This is helpful if you have multiple projects, multiple days of scanning, or you went out and scanned a big area, but you only carry about a couple of scans that you need to go and extract from this raw scan data set. So you can turn off and on the entire bundle, but we want to keep, let's say, just these two scans. So if I wanted to isolate these two, all you got to do is delete the links, or enough links to where these setups or these bundles are isolated from everything else. So as soon as I delete this one, at this point I'm now going to have two separate bundles. So if I wanted to, I can then turn that checkbox off and it's only going to import these two setups. Or I can do it the other way around and do just those 27 and ignore those two. So different ways you can go about that. So I'm going to go link these back in together. Oops. Holding control, add link. Since I didn't move anything, it should still come in correctly. But if I did click and left click and move one of the bundles when they're separated, it could have messed with the link, or I could have accidentally created a bad link, and just be something you have to go and fix after everything's been fully imported. With import options, so you have a few. Generally speaking, what you see here for RTC 360 data is pretty typical. Auto black and white, unless you're using black and white target cards as constraints for registration, and you're not using cloud to cloud, or you don't want to use cloud to cloud. I can get into the weeds about different circumstances or environments or data sets that you may want to do that. But in this scenario, we're not using black and white target cards for our constraints. We're simply using them for a handful of control points to geolocate this project, this data set, to real world coordinates. But if you have auto black and white enabled or turned on, it's going to search every setup. It's going to look through this 360 scan and try to auto identify and extract any black and white target cards. Sometimes it works decent. Sometimes it can pick up a lot of false positives, snap targets to the corners of targets, or snap the black and white targets to objects or features such as like a brick wall that it kind of can mimic a intersection of like a black and white checkered target. So just gotta be careful if you're going to go that route. But in any case, that's how you'd go and auto extract them during import. I'm not going to do that. Autosphere, exact same concept. It's going to search every single setup in the 360 scan, and it's going to go and look for spheres. Within your import settings in the links, you're going to see Autosphere target diameter. You just got to make sure you have this set to the correct size of spheres that you're using, and it should help identify all the spheres throughout the bundle and accurately snap to the center point of those spheres. Again, I'm not going to use that for this. Auto Cloud, it's a last resort. Generally speaking, I never use it. I never recommend you use it because it's so slow. It's assuming all of these setups have no link relationship information or any kind of pre-registration, pre-alignment. It's going to assume, you have none of that. Therefore, it's going to, from scratch, take setup 1, compare it into the other 28 setups, and try to find auto match surfaces. And then it's going to go setup 2 and search into all the other 28 setups, and you just keep going down the line. It's going to search and try to find the best fit relationship to ultimately find a link. It's an incredibly slow process because it has to check so many setups between other setups, and it's just going to kind of go in a very long loop of whatever that algorithm is to go and auto line and auto cloud your setups together. You do have options with Smart Align. You can help group it by time, basically what order were the scans selected at or are taken at, by distance. So if you have the viz tracking or no viz tracking, I'm trying to remember how by distance works exactly, but basically I think it's going to try to use some of the viz alignment to help it align that Smart Align. But yeah, generally speaking, we're not using any of these. So auto cloud is always off. But pre-registered is one you will use from time to time. Couple scenarios. One is if you have truly a pre-registered data set, right? You have an E57, an LGSX, PTX or PTS point cloud, LAS, RCP. There might be some other ones I'm missing that are possible for import. But if you have a data set that is fully registered to where you do not want Register 360 to affect, adjust, change the registration relationships between setups whatsoever, you want to have this option enabled. Don't enable this if you're just using Field 360 links. Yeah, it's still going to import just fine, but it's not going to actually do anything during import, and it's not necessarily going to like save you time or anything. It's, if anything, it's just a few seconds. But in any case, pre-registered, it keeps the file exactly as is, and it's also going to create a, you'll see it show up within your user coordinate system list, but you're going to see if there's any real world coordinates or alignment to real world or an alignment in space. It's going to have all that saved within the data set. So again, if you want to keep a fully registered data set intact without affecting it whatsoever during import, you put pre-registered on. If there's coordinate systems you want to have it set to an elevation or keep the same elevation, you can have pre-registered, and it'll bring all the information in and won't affect it. Again, for Field 360 links and iPad pre-alignment, pre-registration in the field, still I'm going to leave that off because it's going to go and run each of these links it has created during import, or you can have that setting turned off if you want. Setting is links apply during import. It's going to go verify, make sure all the links it's running Cloud on are going to be within that criteria. So that's pre-registered. Import images, this is another one. It's going to be kind of up to you whether or not you import them or not. In this project specifically, I think I have like 4 or 5 setups that have images captured. The rest are black and white. So it's not going to affect a whole lot in terms of like import time. But when it comes to import duration, the import images is going to be the biggest factor of import time. So right, your panel images within your general tab. One, you have import performance, which is basically just how many scans simultaneously it'll import at once. Depending on your computer hardware resources, how much RAM. For example, I've got a 13900K CPU running 128 gigs of RAM with a 4090 GPU. But more specifically, the RAM, the system memory, is what really dictates how many setups it can import simultaneously. So for us, we leave it on fast, gets the job done, no issues. Can change it to balanced. It's going to go cut the number of setups it imports in half. And if you go safe mode, it's only ever going to do one setup at a time. So if you have very limited RAM, if you have like say only 32 gigs, which I'd say is the bare minimum needed to run this software, you probably want to keep it in safe mode to not overuse your system memory and prevent more random crashes. But again, when it comes to import images, this panel image resolution is going to be the biggest factor of the import time it takes. So not only the image resolution, but the scanned environment can change the import time dramatically. So if you're like outdoors, you're open to the sky, you're really just capturing horizontal surfaces, ground or whatever, those images are going to process super fast. They're, for this computer specifically, you're anywhere from like 35 to 1 minute, 35 seconds to like 1 minute per setup. But if I'm like indoors, say like in a construction site, in open walls, open ceilings, where it's just framing and all of the various MEPF systems, right? There's a lot of systems overlapping. There's a lot of potential parallaxing issues seen with the cameras because the RTC cameras aren't perfectly centered on the rotation axis. They're slightly offset. Therefore, as it stitches all the photos together, it has some errors within those images that it has to try and fix and correct. And that parallaxing, that issue, is probably what takes the longest to import and to make the images look good. And then just the import resolution on top of that will also make that go much faster or slower. So again, for outdoor environment, very simple, open to the sky, not a whole lot of like features or complex geometry that it has to try and fix within the images. Full 5K on this computer, we'll just call it a minute, no more. 4K, it will typically cut that import duration almost in half. So almost 30, maybe 40 seconds at 4K. 2K, again, it's cutting in about half. And then 1K, if black and white scans with no images imported are typically like 8 to 12 seconds, you might be adding 5 to 10 seconds on top of that, just doing 1K images. As to what resolution you should use, so 4K is good for 99% of people, I would say, and 99% of like different scenarios and objects and data sets. The difference in resolution between 4K and 5K is very, very minor. Only if you're trying to like zoom 20, 30 feet away from a scanner's position, trying to see detail into something, whether that's snapped chalk lines, grid line intersections on the ground or the concrete, or target cards, I shouldn't say target cards, but like benchmarks or features or objects that can be really hard to see at distance, then you might want to go 5K. But like for 99% of like how we use these scanners within the construction industry, 4K is as good as we ever need. And it's also going to make sure everything imports quicker. So I will import this or I'll change it to 4K. But again, you can change this as needed. If you aren't in a time crunch, don't need to go super fast, you can let it crank overnight. By all means, max it out. It'll just increase the project size a little bit. So import images, again, that's what takes the longest during import. If it's anywhere from like a minute a setup, maybe a minute and a half, depending on the environment that's scanned and how much parallaxing it has to fix. If you have images turned off, that same scan, regardless of the environment, is for this computer specifically is about 8 to 10 seconds of setup. So definitely need to play with that, understand what your computer and hardware is capable of so that you can kind of know the expectations for the time frames it takes to turn data sets around. So that's all I need there. So this one, we will import images. I already did once we go into the next video. But yeah, so filter points by distance. I don't use this a whole lot, pretty rare. Sometimes I'll do it with, if there's like sensitive projects or areas that we gotta make sure we don't keep within the data. We can enable that. If it's pretty self-explanatory, you're just gonna ignore all points that are closer than 1 meter, and then further away than 100 meters. You can also just change this to whatever you want, 0 and maybe just 100. Right, so I think it defaults to that 1 meter distance. It can also be helpful if you're in environments that like you're going to have a lot of reflections or windows and glass features that are, say, always around that 100 to 150 feet away from your setup. If you know that and you don't care about that, you can have it ignore all that right from the get-go during import. If you have lots of vegetation, that's always a rough set amount away from where your scanning positions are at. You can also do that just to automate some of that point reduction, or I guess just point cloud cleaning. But again, it doesn't really affect anything because you can always manually clean both cloud to cloud and visual after import very, very quickly. Select coordinate system. So if you want, you can utilize basically the GPS information from your scanner setups, and it'll try to set them to a state plane coordinate system. The GPS in the scanner is, I think, equivalent, maybe a little bit better than something like your phone. So it's not going to be super accurate like a true GPS, but it'll just kind of position them in space approximately. So whether you want to go UTM or state plane, up to you. Again, though, we typically don't mess with that since we're using control points to set the geolocation of our data sets. Point cloud classification. So there's only 2 classification models, indoor and outdoor. We'll get into this in later videos, but generally this is not something we run during import. In the rare circumstances we do want to run classification, we'll always do it after it's been imported. So I would leave that off for our use cases, but by all means, if you want to let it crank, let it go. But this is very heavily dependent on your GPU hardware. Having a powerful GPU, having the right hardware, but on my computer with a 4090 NVIDIA GPU, I think it's anywhere from like 8 to 12 minutes of setup it takes to go and run that classification. So very time-consuming process to be aware of. So across the top side, top ribbon, can you have your sitemap where you can go and add multiple sitemaps if you want to break up scanners or setups into different areas. You can also delete sitemaps if you don't need them. We also have an option for this geo image kind of background for the sitemap. So initially, once you click that, it's going to kind of give you a rough starting point of your GPS coordinates. And then from there, you can look up your address, you can change your view, you can go to satellite view, etc. And then we're just going to go and simply hit get image. So now you're going to see right there's this background image placed. So if I wanted to get the scans roughly aligned to there, you can hit the place by geo coordinates. And then from there, and again, it's kind of a bit buggy with how Register works or lets you zoom in and out or not at all with this latest version. But in any case, if you want, and then you can kind of fine tune it, hold shift on the keyboard, rotate it, get it just right before you're happy, and then that'll help go into the sitemap exports and view. You can also choose an asset for the project thumbnail. This is just, I believe, is going to go to when you go file open. So if I were to just go select this guy, so now you're going to see that image open up there. You can change it to any other attachments that you want and have, and then you have setup information off or on, or setup name off or on. So I'm just going to go close this and reopen just so that I can get the scans kind of back in my main view. Drag these over. Again, it's going to freeze up for a second. So I'm not going to do the place by geo coordinates just because the import's a little bit buggy. It doesn't really let you zoom in and out once you're, or pan around once you've zoomed out too far. And it's kind of limited with how far you can even pan around. So usually that's unlimited, zoom in and out, move around, but there's just something in this 25 version that's a little bit buggy. In any case, if you wanted to, again, all of this rotation alignment is just from the Field 360 app. You can just select and drag if you want to pan and move around. If you hold shift on the keyboard and then left click on a setup and left click and hold, you can then rotate the point cloud or your data set to match more like real world orientation. But in this case, I'll just leave it roughly plan north for when we ultimately go and add real world coordinates, which will set the rotation. But other than that, that's about it for the import stage. If you wanted to, I guess you can select multiple setups. If you have links or setups that don't have them all tied together, you instead of just selecting individual ones to drag and move them, whether it be to different setups, sitemaps, whatever, you can use your fence tool. But other than that, that's about it for the import stage. Not a whole lot else to go over. So again, at this point, you just hit import. I'm not going to since I already got this job imported. But at that point, again, definitely good to kind of do some test runs, sample projects, just so you understand kind of the capabilities, the power, the speed of your computer, to help, I guess, just understand what kind of time commitments you're going to have for future projects and future data sets. So with that, we'll see you after it's been imported and kind of go through the registration side of things.